Well, according to legend, Rome began when the twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, founded the city on the banks of the Tiber River in central Italy sometime in the 8th century BC. A couple of hundred years later, in 509 BC, after the Romans became fed up with the tyranny of the kings, Rome established a republic and began the territorial expansion that would eventually include all the lands around the Mediterranean Sea. And then in 27 BC, after years of chaos and civil war, the Senate proclaimed Julius Caesar's nephew, Augustus, emperor. And it was Augustus who established the Roman Empire, which, as a whole, lasted until 476 AD, when its western provinces collapsed. But the empire actually continued in the east with many ups and downs until 1453 AD, with the conquest of Constantinople by the Ottoman Turks. At its height, the Roman Empire extended from the borders of Scotland in the west, through Central Europe as far as Syria and Iraq in the east, and then back west all across the northern fringe of Africa to Spain and Portugal. And that's why people who lived in the empire sometimes referred to the Mediterranean Sea as the Roman Lake. Wherever the Romans spread, they saw themselves as bringing true civilization with them. But it wasn't so much language. True, in the West they brought their Latin, but in the East they were happy to accommodate the everyday Greek that so many people spoke for business and education. And it wasn't religion either. The Romans considered themselves to be a tolerant people when it came to religion. People were free to keep their gods, their temples, their beliefs, and their customs. No, it was the law and order they provided and their progressive cosmopolitan outlook that the Romans prided themselves on bestowing to a divided and chaotic world. The one thing, though, that the Romans would never tolerate was disloyalty. And that was probably the central reason why from the middle of the 1st century until the second decade of the 4th century, Rome came to distrust and openly persecute a movement that was spreading throughout its lands, Christianity. Now, there were a number of reasons why Romans, Greeks, and others disliked Christianity. For one thing, Christians were accused of being atheists. I know, that sounds bizarre, but from a pagan point of view, if you believe in many gods and goddesses and the Christians tell you that these deities are false, that they don't exist, then that sounds like atheism to you. Your gods don't exist? Our God is the one true God. Christians were also accused of being immoral, and I know that sounds pretty wild too, but Christians often displayed affection toward one another in public, greeting each other with a kiss on the cheek, for instance. They also had the habit of using an unfortunate term for the communal meals they shared after worship. They called these meals their love feasts. And if you understand how hypersexual Greco-Roman culture was, you can see why many people took these innocent practices in the worst possible, in the most sexually explicit ways. Then Christians were rumored to be cannibals. What? Really? Cannibals? I'm afraid so. You see, people had heard that whenever Christians worshiped together, they ate someone's body and drank someone's blood. Well, obviously, this is what we now know to be Holy Communion or the Lord's Supper. But it was not any of these things. It was the Christians' refusal to give Rome their deepest allegiance, their truest loyalty, that made many of the Roman emperors from Nero in the 1st century to Diocletian in the 4th determined to crack down on this rogue movement. Well, one of the lands that Rome added to its empire was Judea, annexing Judea in 63 BC. Here's a coin minted to commemorate the very event. You can see that the Romans weren't at all concerned with political correctness or sensitivity. The coin shows a Jewish woman weeping under a palm tree and a captive Judean man standing behind her. The caption reads, Iudea capta, or Judea captive. If you read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Romans seem to pop up all over the place. It was the Emperor Augustus who ordered the census that forced Joseph and Mary to travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem, where Jesus would be born. Matthew made a good living collecting taxes for the Romans before Jesus called him to be a disciple. A Roman centurion begged Jesus to heal his dying servant, and Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, condemned Jesus to crucifixion. And in the rest of the New Testament, the early Christians sometimes ran afoul of the Roman authorities, like Paul did at the end of the book of Acts. At other times, they took advantage of the rights that Rome granted its citizens and used its amazing infrastructure to spread the good news quickly and efficiently. And in those days, if you saw the imperial seal SPQR, or Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and people of Rome, that meant that Roman authority and power were present. Well, in a moment, Melinda and I will take you to Beit She'an, a large, prosperous outpost of Rome that was located just south of the Sea of Galilee in present-day Israel. The video tour will begin with Melinda walking up over the crest of a hill and panning the Roman ruins below, and then I will explain what you're seeing as we look at the excavated ruins from the top of that hill. And finally, we'll take you to the well-preserved Roman theater at Beit She'an. A quick warning, though, there's going to be a big boom at the end of the video. The Israeli Airforce happened to fly over at that moment, creating a sudden sonic boom. Believe me, we were all pretty startled when it happened. But come along to the Roman outpost of Beit She'an. Let's go. Right behind me, you've got the Roman city of Beit She'an, and probably one of the best compact Roman-looking areas that you'll see any place in the world, except maybe outside Rome. And so this is the power of Rome right here. Rome exercised authority over this area. This would be at the very eastern end of the Roman Empire, and it would have extended all the way to Spain and to Britain in the west. And so you see down behind, you see there's a theater, there's a Roman bath. The big open area is the forum, and the shops, the colonnades of the shops. So all of that is a very good picture of a Roman city, and interesting to see how much influence Rome had over this area during the time of Christ. We're in the Roman theater here in Beit She'an, and you can see the seats behind me. This is maybe half the seats that were originally there. There was an earthquake that destroyed this place in 749 AD, but really quite impressive. This is the most impressive theater we've seen so far. But everywhere Rome went, they established their own culture. They brought their own culture, and they brought the Roman way of life and the whole perspective of Rome to wherever they went. And of course, this would have been an issue in the ancient world as people tried to, as believers from a Jewish background, tried to, hold true to their beliefs and yet live in this Greco-Roman world. And we see that eventually they figured it out, and the Roman world did become Christianized. But it took a while, obviously, for them to figure out how to bring biblical values to the culture. So this is a good place to talk about those things. We live in a world today where we need to figure out the same thing. How do we bring biblical values to postmodern culture in the 21st century? And that was a sonic boom from the Israeli Air Force.